Ma'am. Hello. Yeah, you. You're in the wrong building. This is a military personnel office, not the DMV. So whatever it is you think you're doing here, it's not happening. Do everybody a favor, and don't take a number you don't need. The voice carried across the waiting room, the way young men's voices carry when they have decided the room belongs to them. It bounced off the cinder block walls, off the laminate counter, off the rows of bolted plastic chairs, and it landed on a woman in a plain blue jacket sitting near the back, with a folder resting on her knees. She did not look up. The Personnel Support Detachment office at Joint Expeditionary Base Little Creek was full that gray Tuesday morning, full the way government waiting rooms are always full. Slowly, patiently, without hope of speed. Fluorescent tubes hummed overhead. A television bolted to the ceiling played a muted news channel no one watched. The air smelled of burnt coffee left too long on a warming plate and the sharp chemical sweetness of floor wax. A ticket machine by the door dispensed little paper numbers, and a red digital sign above the counter clicked through them one at a time, unbothered by anyone's mourning. The woman in the blue jacket had drawn number 41. She had been sitting for over an hour. In that hour, she had not looked at her phone, had not sighed, had not shifted in her seat. She had folded the single sheet of paper in her lap into a neat square, and then unfolded it, and then folded it again, along the same creases. The way a person folds a pressure dressing before anyone needs it, out of a habit the hands keep long after the reason is gone. She looked, to everyone who bothered to look at all, like somebody's aunt, somebody's neighbor, a civilian who had wandered into the wrong line and would need help finding the right one. Middle of her 30s, maybe older, hard to say. No rank on her, obviously. No ribbons. No bearing that any of these people would have recognized as bearing. Just a quiet woman in a windbreaker, waiting. That was the thing about her, the thing none of them could have said, and all of them felt without knowing. She took up almost no space at all. People who have seen the worst thing frequently don't. They come back from it, having learned that the loud ones are rarely the dangerous ones, and they spend the rest of their lives being quiet on purpose, folding themselves down small, because they have carried something so heavy that they never again want to be handed anything at all. She had turned invisibility into a craft. It had taken her most of a decade, and it worked on everyone in the room except the one old Marine behind the counter, who had spent his own 22 years learning to see exactly the people the world was built to overlook. The young man 2 seats down had decided she was funny. His name was Riker Malloy, and he was a special warfare operator 2nd class. A SEAL, 3 years in the teams, and possessed of the specific, unshakable certainty that belongs to a young man who has done one genuinely hard thing and concluded from it that he understands the world. He had come in to fix a pay issue and had been told to take a number like everyone else, and being told to wait was to Riker Malloy a small daily injustice he had never learned to swallow quietly. So he had found an audience instead. His swim buddy, a lanky 3rd class named Jonah Pike, sat beside him with a phone held at a careless angle, half filming the way young men film everything now, waiting for something worth the clip. "I'm just saying," Malloy went on, louder, turning it into a bit for Pike. "Somebody should tell her. It's a kindness, really. Ma'am, the family services building is across the lot. You want the one with the flowers out front. This one's for people who actually, you know." He spread his hands. "Serve." The woman in the blue jacket set the folded square of paper flat on top of her folder. She looked at it for a moment. Then she said, without heat, without volume, in a voice pitched only to reach him and no farther, "I'll wait for my number." That was all. 5 words. She went back to being still. Behind the counter, a man had stopped moving. His name was Hector Alarcon, and he had spent 22 years in the Marine Corps and retired a gunnery sergeant before taking this civilian job running the customer service desk, because he had discovered that he could not stop being early to things and needed somewhere to be. He had a stack of folders in one hand and a number to call in the other, and he had glanced up at the back row out of pure reflex, and then he had not looked away. He was looking at the way the woman sat. Alarcon had seen a great many people wait in this room. He knew the postures. He knew the leg jiggle of the impatient and the phone hunch of the bored and the forward lean of the anxious. He had never once, in 4 years at this counter, seen anyone sit the way this woman was sitting, upright without stiffness, hands folded and utterly quiet. Weight settled evenly, eyes soft and unfocused on the middle distance, the posture of a person who had learned, somewhere, at some cost, how to make herself very small and very calm in a room full of noise. It was not the stillness of someone who was frightened. It was the stillness of someone who had decided, a long time ago, that stillness was safer than being seen. He set the folders down slowly on the counter. He forgot the number in his hand. He had seen that stillness exactly once before, a long way from here, in a much worse place, and it had belonged to somebody the whole valley talked about in a hush. The morning went on, and it should have been ordinary. It was the child that broke it open. A young mother had come in with a toddler and a stroller and a diaper bag, and the harried look of a woman moving 3 things at once. The boy, 2 years old, and delighted with his own new legs, had toddled to the row of windows and put his hands on the glass, and then, because that is what 2-year-olds do, had lost his footing on the waxed floor and gone down and caught the corner of the low windowsill with his mouth. The sound he made was the sound that empties a mother's chest. Blood came fast, the way it does from lips, bright and out of all proportion to the wound, running down the boy's chin and onto his shirt, and the mother was on her knees with both hands out and no idea what to do with them, saying his name over and over, and the whole waiting room turned to look and did the thing waiting rooms do, which is nothing. The woman in the blue jacket was already there. No one saw her stand. She was simply, between one breath and the next, crouched at the child's level on the balls of her feet, one hand cradling the back of his head, the other tilting his chin up into the light with a touch so matter-of-fact that the boy stopped screaming out of sheer surprise. She had a folded napkin from somewhere, the square of paper napkin from the coffee station, and she pressed it to the split lip with a precise, unhurried pressure in exactly the right place, and she was talking the whole time in a low, even murmur that was not aimed at the boy's fear, but underneath it. There he is. Look at you. That's a good loud yell. That's a healthy yell. To the mother, without looking up. He's fine. Lips bleed loud and heal fast. There's a lot of blood and almost no wound. That's how mouths are. Pressure here. 2 full minutes. Don't peek at it. Count with me. Her free hand had already found the boy's wrist. 2 fingers laid along it out of a reflex older than thought. Checking a pulse she did not need to check on a child who was going to be perfectly all right. Behind the counter, Hector Alarcon heard her voice drop half an octave as she settled into it, heard the shape of the words change, heard the cadence of a person running a checklist they had run 1,000 times in the dark, and he heard, under his breath, so quietly he might have imagined it, the phrase she said to herself as her thumb found the pressure point. High and tight. Alarcon's mouth went dry. That was not a phrase a nurse used. That was not a phrase a school volunteer used. That was a tourniquet call, muscle memory, the words a combat corpsman says to a bleeding Marine. And she had said it to herself over a toddler's split lip because her hands did not know the difference between a scared child and a hard day, because they had been trained too well and too long ago to ever fully stand down. He turned to the terminal at the back of the counter and began, quietly, to pull up the morning's appointment manifest, scrolling for a name he could not yet let himself believe he would find. He had been at Sangin in 2011, attached to a rifle company as they pushed up the Helmand River, and he had not been in the wadi that morning. He had been 2 kilometers south with the rest of the company, listening to it happen over the radio, listening to a corpsman's voice stay calm on the net while the world came apart around her, calling her trips, refusing to be rushed. He had never seen her face. Almost no one had. But he had heard, the way everyone in that valley heard, about the doc who went back 3 times, and about the boy she could not bring home, and the name the Marines had given her. And he had carried the story around for 15 years, the way you carry the few genuinely holy things you are ever lucky enough to hear. And now, a woman was folding a napkin into a pressure dressing in his waiting room and saying high and tight to herself over a baby's lip, and his hands had gone cold on the keyboard. 2 seats away, Riker Malloy watched the woman soothe the child and saw only more material. "Look at that," he said to Pike, grinning, nodding at her. "Napkin nurse. You moonlight at a daycare, ma'am? That your real skill set?" The woman settled the boy back into his mother's arms, showed the mother exactly where to hold the napkin, and for how long, and returned to her chair. She picked her folder back up. She folded the square of paper along its creases. She did not answer him. And there is a discipline in a room full of people to being very small, a discipline she had practiced for 15 years because she had learned that being unseen was the only way she had ever found to carry what she carried without setting it down where it could hurt somebody else. By the top of the hour, the 2 of them had turned it into a show. Pike had lowered the phone from filming and started feeding Malloy lines, and Malloy had picked them up and run with them, the 2 of them building a bit about the lost lady in the back, loud enough now that the young mother had pulled her stroller to the far corner and turned her son away from them, loud enough that the 2 sailors in working uniforms by the door had found something enormously interesting on their own phones. This is how it works, the cruelty of comfortable people. It is never one large thing. It is 100 small ones, each individually deniable, each easy to laugh off if anyone objected. A tone, a nickname, a glance at a buddy, a joke pitched just loud enough to be heard, and just quiet enough to be waved away. Malloy was good at it the way some young men are good at it, with an instinct for exactly how far he could go. And he read the silent room as permission, because that is what a silent room always looks like to a bully. He did not understand that the silence was not permission. The silence was a held breath. The silence was a dozen people who could feel, without being able to say, that they were watching a boy walk cheerfully out onto ice that was already beginning to crack. Malloy got up. He crossed the room to the water cooler, which required passing directly in front of the woman in the blue jacket, and on the way, he tilted his head to read the tab on the folder in her lap, upside down, and made a show of what he thought it was. "Ah," he said. "Benefits. Or is it a dependent card? You getting your ID redone? See, that makes sense. That's a real thing you can do here." He filled a paper cone with water, drank it, crushed it, tossed it. He gave her a name for the room, because bullies give people names. "Relax, paperwork. Nobody's mad at you. You just gotta understand. This is a real place for real people who actually did something. Sit tight. You'll get your little card." The woman looked up. She did not look at Malloy. She looked at the clock on the wall, the round institutional clock with the red second hand, and she watched it sweep once, and then she looked back down at her folder. And she said one thing, quietly, and it landed wrong for him because it was not afraid. "Take your time, sailor. I've waited on worse." Malloy laughed it off for the room, but for half a second, his grin flickered, because "I've waited on worse," was not the sentence of a woman who was afraid of him, and some animal part of him registered that and did not know what to do with it, and so he buried it under a bigger laugh. Behind the counter, Alar Khan stood with a phone pressed to his ear, watching, not intervening. His jaw was tight. He was waiting for something, and he did not take his eyes off the woman in the blue jacket while he waited for it. If you have ever watched someone loud mistake a quiet person for a weak one, stay with this and subscribe to the Veteran Vault. You are going to want to be here when the door opens. It stopped being a joke a few minutes later. Pike, bored of the bit, dared Malloy to actually ask her. No, for real. Ask her what she even did. And Malloy, who had never in his life declined a dare in front of a camera, leaned down over the back of the empty chair beside the woman and put the question to her as an interrogation, for the lens. Okay, serious question. For the record. He held up 2 fingers as if swearing something. What did you do? What was your rank? You even have one? Because from where I'm sitting, you're a lady in a windbreaker taking a chair from somebody who actually bled for that building. So I'd love to know. What did you do? The woman was quiet for a moment, and then she told him the truth in the smallest words it would fit into, so quietly that it could not possibly sound like a boast. I was a corpsman. A corpsman. Malloy straightened up, delighted, and turned to Pike and spread his arms wide to the whole room. A corpsman. Band-aids. She handed out Band-aids. He looked back down at her, and his voice took on the particular cruelty of a man who has found something he thinks is soft. That's my whole point, ma'am. That's exactly my point. You did paperwork with gauze, and now you're doing paperwork with paper. Nothing's changed. Behind the counter, Alar Khan's hand closed on the gate at the end of the laminate. A younger clerk beside him asked, low, if he was all right. Alar Khan answered without moving his lips much. Do not, he said. Let anybody touch her. The room had gone quiet in the way rooms go quiet when they know something ugly is happening and have collectively decided not to be the one to stop it. The 2 sailors studied their phones. The mother would not look. The muted television flickered, and the woman in the blue jacket sat alone in a room full of people, more alone than a person should be able to be in a crowd, because not one of them would meet her eyes. She felt it the way she felt everything now, from a small distance, as though she were watching herself sit in the chair. She had a rule, and the rule had kept her intact through 15 years and more funerals than she let herself count. And the rule was simple. She did not spend what she had on people who had not earned it. The stillness the whole room could see was not weakness, and it was not fear. It was a door held shut. Behind that door was a woman who had knelt in other people's blood and sung 19-year-olds into the dark and come out the far side of it with her hand steady. And she did not open that door for a boy with a phone, because that woman was not for him, was not for this room, was, she had decided long ago, for the ones who could no longer speak for themselves and for nobody else. Malloy played to the lens, and he said the thing that would, in a very few minutes, be the most expensive sentence of his young life. You can wear whatever you want, lady, he said, flat, smiling, certain. You can carry all the folders you want, but in this building, you will always be a nobody. The woman in the blue jacket went still. Not the still she had been before. A different, deeper, more complete stillness. The specific stillness of a person who is holding an answer in both hands and deciding deliberately not to give it. The stillness of someone who could end this and has chosen, again, as she had chosen for 15 years, to absorb it instead. That was when Hector Alar Khan came around the counter. He did not hurry, and he did not raise his voice, and he did not threaten anyone, which is how you could tell he had been a gunnery sergeant, because the dangerous ones are quiet. He came around the end of the laminate, crossed the waxed floor, and put himself between the young SEAL and the woman in the blue jacket, and he spoke to Malloy the way an old Marine speaks to a boy who is standing on a ledge he cannot see. "Son," Alarcon said, "I'm going to give you a gift you have not earned. I want you to sit down, put the phone away, and pray to whatever you pray to, that this woman does not remember your face by tonight. Because you are standing over the wrong person, and you have no idea, none, how wrong." Malloy tried to make it a joke for Pike. "Whoa, okay, the desk guy's tough." But the joke did not travel. The room's temperature had changed, and everyone felt it before Malloy did. That subtle collective sensing a crowd does when the ground has shifted under one person and not yet under him. Alarcon was not looking at Malloy anymore. He was looking at the woman, and he said something to her, very quietly. Not her name. A word. A Marine's word. The word an old grunt uses for the one person in a valley everyone owed their lives to and could never repay. "Sangin," he said. 2011. First of the 9th pushed up the river. I was attached." He swallowed. "I know who carried them out, Doc. I've known since you walked in." For the first time all morning, the woman in the blue jacket met someone's eyes. She looked at Hector Alarcon, retired gunnery sergeant, United States Marine Corps, and something passed between them that had no words in it. Veteran to veteran, a recognition that did not need names. Because there is a fraternity that has nothing to do with branch or rank or era, and it is made entirely of people who have been to the same country, not the country on the map, the other one, the one you can only reach by way of the worst day of your life. And its members know one another on sight, across a crowded room, in a heartbeat, by the set of the shoulders and the quality of the quiet. Alarcon had lived his whole second life at this counter, learning to be unremarkable, and he had looked up an hour ago and seen a fellow citizen of that country, sitting in the back row, being called a nobody, and every cell in his old body had come to attention long before his spine did. And then she gave a small shake of her head. "Don't," it said. "Let it lie. Let me be nobody. It's easier." Beyond the glass doors at the curb, headlights slid to a stop. Then, behind them, a second set. Then a third. Alarcon straightened. What the boy with the phone does not know is that the next 90 seconds are going to teach him something the entire United States Navy could not. Subscribe to the Veteran Vault, so you do not miss what walks through that door. 3 black SUVs slowed at the curb outside the glass doors and stopped, one behind the other, and the whole tone of the morning changed before a single door had opened. 15 years earlier, and 7,000 miles away, the light came up gray over a dry wadi outside Sangin, and Hospital Corpsman 3rd Class Maren Rasmussen, 23 years old, walked in the middle of a Marine patrol file along the lip of a dead riverbed and smelled the morning and thought, the way she thought every morning, that today they would probably be all right. She carried an aid bag that weighed as much as a person. She carried it the way she carried everything then, lightly, because she was young and strong and had not yet learned what things cost. The Marines around her were boys, most of them younger than she was, and they called her Doc, and they would have walked into the sea for her, and she loved them with the fierce, impersonal love of a corpsman for her platoon, which is a love that has already made its peace with loss and goes on loving anyway. She knew their letters home, and their girlfriends' names, and which of them was scared of the dark, and would never say so. She knew who carried a rosary, and who carried a photograph, and who carried nothing at all and pretended that was strength. She had learned their bodies the way a mechanic learns an engine, so that when the day came, and the day always came, Her hands would already know the map. That was the job. Nobody told you the job was love. They told you it was medicine, and it was medicine. But underneath the medicine, it was love. And love is the heaviest thing a person can carry into a place built to take it away from you. The lead fire team stepped into the wadi, and the world came apart. The pressure plate charge went off under the point man's boot with a sound that was not a sound, so much as a hole punched in the air, and the concussion knocked the file flat, and into the ringing silence that follows a blast, the silence that taught Maren Rasmussen everything she would ever know about stillness. The machine gun opened up from the tree line across the wadi. Later, she would not remember deciding to move. She would only remember being already up, already across the open ground, running toward the place where the fire was, which was the wrong way, which was the only way, because that was where the young lieutenant was down. Second Lieutenant Silas Beckett had taken a round through the thigh, and the femoral was open, and he was going to bleed out in 90 seconds in the bottom of a ditch in a country he could not have found on a map 2 years before. Maren went to her knees in the dirt beside him, with rounds walking past both of them, and she got the tourniquet high on his leg and cranked it down past where it hurt, past where he screamed, and she put her face directly over his, and she said the thing she said to all of them. "Look at me, sir. Eyes here. You are not dying in a ditch. Not today. Not on me. Now push, push, push. Stay with me." And she dragged a 200-pound man by his drag handle across 15 meters of open wadi to the lip of the bank, and she rolled him over the edge into cover, and then she went back. She went back a second time, for a corporal with his arm laid open. She went back a third time, for a private who could not walk, and on the third trip, a round caught her across the back of the shoulder and spun her half around, and she felt the hot line of it, and she kept moving, because the private could not, and she got him too. There is an arithmetic to it that no one who has not done it will ever fully believe. In the middle of the worst noise the world can make, a corpsman's mind goes very cold and very quiet and begins to count. Who is breathing? Who is bleeding? Who can wait? Who cannot? Who is already gone and must be left so the living can be reached? It is the loneliest math there is. Maren did it on her knees in the open, with rounds cracking past her head, and she did it without flinching. And the Marines on the bank watched a 23-year-old woman walk back into the fire 3 separate times, as though she had somewhere she needed to be. And something in each of them was changed forever by the watching. 3 trips, 3 men, over the bank, alive. And then there was Kingman. Lance Corporal Wesley. Kingman was 19 years old and came from a town in West Virginia she could not pronounce, and he had a chest wound that she saw the instant she reached him and knew, the way you know, the way the body tells the hands before it tells the mind, that this was the one she was not going to win. She worked on him anyway. She sealed the chest, and she breathed for him, and she did everything, exactly right, kneeling over him in the red dust, with her own blood running down her arm, and it was not enough, because sometimes you do everything right, and it is not enough. And that is the thing no one tells you, and the thing you never, ever get over. He was awake at the end. They so rarely are, and he was, and he looked up at her with no fear in his face at all, only a kind of wonder. And he said the thing the platoon said about her, the name they had given her after the first firefight, the one she had always hated because she had never earned it. "You're the Valkyrie, Doc," Wesley Kingman said, very far away now. "Everybody says, you carry us home." A breath. "Tell my mom I wasn't scared." And then he was gone, and Maren Rasmussen knelt in the red dirt with her forehead pressed against a dead boy's helmet, while a medevac bird came in low over the tree line, and the down blast tore at her hair, and she did not move for a long time. The valley talked about her after that in a hush. 3 trips through a live kill zone. 3 Marines alive who would not have been. They put her in for the Navy Cross, and she let them because it would have been rude not to, and she never once in 15 years wore it where anyone could see, because every time she looked at it, she saw a 19-year-old's face with no fear in it, saying, "Tell my mom." She did tell his mother. She had driven 11 hours to a hollow in West Virginia to do it in person, because it was not the kind of thing you said on a phone, and she had sat in a small kitchen that smelled of coffee and wood smoke and told a gray-haired woman that her son had not been afraid at the end, which was true, and that he had asked about her, which was also true, and she had left out every other thing, all the things a mother should never have to carry, and she had carried them home herself instead. That was the day she stopped wearing the ribbon. A medal, she had decided somewhere on the drive back, was a thing they gave you so the story could have an ending. But there was no ending. There was only a kitchen in West Virginia, and a name, and a woman who now, on gray Tuesdays in personnel offices, made herself as small as she possibly could, so that she would never again be handed anyone else to lose. The red dust dissolved into gray floor wax, and 3 SUV doors opened at once. Back in the present, in the last few seconds before the doors opened, the young man went too far with his hands. The red digital sign clicked over. Behind the counter, the clerk leaned to a microphone and said, "Number 41. Rasmussen." The woman in the blue jacket stood up, and Riker Malloy, still performing, still riding the certainty that this was his room, stepped sideways into her path and put his open hand flat against her upper arm to push her back, down into the chair. A small, casual shove, the kind you give something in your way. "Not yet, paperwork," he said, grinning at the phone. "Sit down." "Grown-ups are." Her arm did not move where he pushed it. That was the first thing. He pushed, with real weight, the weight of a fit young man who trains for a living, and the woman's arm simply did not go where he sent it, as though he had pushed against the corner of a building. She looked down at his hand on her arm. Then she looked up at his face, and she gave him one quiet chance, in a voice with something underneath it now, something flat and level and very old. "Take your hand off my arm," she said. "I won't ask twice." Behind the counter, Alarcon was already moving, but the woman stopped him with a single glance, a look that said, "No, not you, not for me." Because she had decided a long time ago that she would absorb a thing rather than be the one who started it, and she was not going to break that discipline now for a boy with a phone. And behind Malloy, the glass doors opened. He did not see it. His back was to the doors. But the room saw it. Every face past his shoulder changed at once. The 2 sailors coming up out of their chairs, the mother turning, the clerk behind the counter going pale and straight. And Malloy felt the room shift the way you feel a wave lift the sand out from under your feet, and he grinned wider to cover it, and he said to the woman, still not understanding, "What? Your ride's here?" And he turned around into a rank he had only ever seen on a wall. Rear Admiral Gideon Thorne came through the glass doors first. He was a big man in service dress, a 2-star flag officer, the visiting force commander, and he came in the way flag officers come in, with an aide half a step behind, and the unconscious expectation of a room organizing itself around him. And the room did. The reflexive stiffening, the sailor snapping upright, a lifetime of training, pulling every spine in the place a little straighter. But it was the man a step behind the admiral who stopped dead. Lieutenant Colonel Silas Beckett, United States Marine Corps, 39 years old, with a slight hitch in his stride that a physical therapist had spent years on and never entirely fixed, came through the doors half listening to the admiral's schedule, And then he saw the woman in the blue jacket standing in the middle of the waiting room with a young SEAL's hand still on her arm, and every drop of color went out of his face. "Doc," he said. He said it so quietly that only she heard it. And then he said it again. And this time, the whole room heard it. Because Lieutenant Colonel Beckett had stopped caring about the Admiral's schedule and the Admiral's mourning and every other thing on Earth, and he crossed the waiting room in 6 strides, and he stopped in front of her, and he looked at her face the way a man looks at something he stopped believing he would ever see, and he said the name out loud, the platoon's name, in a government waiting room in Virginia on a gray Tuesday. "It's you." His voice broke on it. "My God, it's the Valkyrie." He turned to the Admiral, and his hand was shaking as he gestured to her, this composed senior Marine suddenly 23 again. Sir, this is the corpsman. This is her. Sangin, 2011. The Wadi. I told you about the Wadi. She's the one who came back 3 times. She is the reason I have a leg. She is the reason I have a life. I have been looking for this woman for 15 years. He had too. It was not a figure of speech. Every base he rotated through, he had asked. Every corpsman's reunion he could find. Every Fleet Marine Force forum. Every old platoon roster. He had sent the same handful of questions into the world for a decade and a half, looking for a woman he knew only as Doc and the Valkyrie, and a face he saw every single time he closed his eyes and remembered a tourniquet, and a voice saying, "You are not dying in a ditch." He had made a genuine nuisance of himself, trying to get her name attached to a citation he could actually read. And here she was, in a windbreaker, being pushed back into a plastic chair by a child in a trident, and the collision of those 2 facts was almost more than Silas Beckett could stand upright through. Rear Admiral Thorne's aide had already stepped to a terminal, and now the aide leaned in and said something low, confirming what the flag officer had already begun to suspect from the look on his Marine's face. A name, a rank, a citation. Lieutenant Commander Maren Rasmussen, Navy Cross. Thorne looked at the woman in the blue jacket. He looked at the young SEAL still standing far too close to her, whose hand had finally, slowly, come off her arm. And Gideon Thorne, who had commanded thousands of sailors and did not miss much, understood the entire shape of the morning in about 2 seconds, and his face went hard as a door. Then he did the only thing there was to do. The Rear Admiral came to attention. "Attention on deck," Thorne said, and his voice filled the little room and rang off the cinder block. He raised his hand in a salute and held it. A 2-star flag officer holding a salute for a lieutenant commander in a windbreaker, in a personnel office, because of the ribbon she never wore. This officer wears the Navy Cross. In any room I am in, she is saluted first. Every one of you, on your feet. Hector Alarcon was already at attention. He had come to it the moment he understood, an old Marine's spine remembering itself. The 2 sailors stood and saluted. The clerk stood. The mother rose with her baby. The whole room came up onto its feet and turned toward the quiet woman in the blue jacket, who had been, 90 seconds ago, a nobody taking a chair. It was very quiet. The muted television flickered on the wall, ignored. Somewhere, a phone buzzed, and no one answered it. The young mother stood with her baby on her hip, and tears standing in her eyes for reasons she could not have named, holding her son up a little, as if she wanted him, someday, to be able to say he had been in the room. Hector Alarcon held his salute with his chin up and his jaw working, an old Marine finally, after 15 years, getting to render honors to the person the whole valley had owed and never repaid. And the woman in the blue jacket stood in the center of all of it and accepted it the way she accepted everything, quietly, without spectacle, her hands still, her eyes soft, because she had learned long ago that the hardest thing to carry is not contempt. The hardest thing to carry is honor, when you know the name of the boy it cost. And Riker Malloy stood in the middle of it, and his face did the whole terrible journey at once. Confusion first, the blankness of a man whose facts have all just failed him. Then disbelief, a small shake of the head. No, this isn't, she's just. Then recognition, the cold drop in the stomach as the pieces slammed together. Corpsman, Sangan, Navy Cross, the ribbon nobody wears, the woman I told. And then horror, pure and total. The horror of a young man watching a rear admiral hold a salute for the person he had just told, on a still-running phone, that she would always be a nobody. His hand was still half raised from where it had been on her arm. Now he did not know what to do with it, and so it drifted upward on its own, without his permission, trembling, into the worst and most necessary salute of his life. The chief arrived within 4 minutes, Riker Malloy's own chief, a hard senior enlisted man who had been reached by phone and had covered the distance from the waterfront at something close to a run, came through the doors, took in the scene, the flag officer, the standing room, the young SEAL with a phone buddy still clutching a recording device, and his face promised a very long and very educational winter. Malloy was relieved on the spot. The phone was taken from Pike as evidence. The two of them were walked out into the parking lot for the kind of conversation that follows a man through his career, and the last thing Malloy saw before the doors closed behind him was the woman in the blue jacket, standing calm in the center of a room full of people at attention, not looking at him at all. It is a strange thing to watch a young man's whole picture of himself come apart in real time. Malloy had walked into that office believing a simple story, that there were people who mattered and people who did not, and that he could tell them apart on sight, and that this was a kind of skill. In the space of 90 seconds, the story had been taken away from him, and he had nothing to put in its place, and that emptiness was written all over his face as his chief walked him out into the gray light and began, very quietly, to explain to him exactly what he had done and to whom, and how long the memory of it was going to live in the teams. Rear Admiral Thorne lowered his salute and turned to her, and his voice gentled. "Commander," he said, "the sailor is yours if you want him. You say the word, and this morning becomes a very long chapter of that young man's life. Court-martial's on the table for laying hands on you. That's your call to make, and no one in the Navy would blink." Maren Rasmussen looked toward the glass doors, where through the reflection she could see the back of Malloy's neck, red and rigid, as his chief spoke into his ear in the parking lot. She looked at him for a long moment. And what she saw, what she always saw, what she could never stop seeing, was that he was young and arrogant and terrified, and about the same age as a boy named Wesley Kingman had been the last time she held him. She shook her head. "He's a young operator who's never been humbled," she said. "That's a wound, not a crime. Don't end him, sir. Don't take his trident for one bad morning in front of a camera. Let him learn it standing up." She paused. "But he's going to learn one name today before he leaves this base. That I'll insist on." Beckett had not left her side. He stood beside her now the way a man stands beside something he has been carrying a debt to for 15 years, and has finally, impossibly, been given the chance to set it down. "The other two," he said quietly. "Torres and Neil. They made it, Doc. Torres has 3 kids. He named the middle one after." He stopped and pressed his lips together and started again. "They both made it. Because you came back. I need you to know that. 15 years I've needed you to know that." Maren looked at him, and for just a moment, the stillness cracked, and something moved behind her eyes that she did not let reach her face. "I know," she said softly. "I always knew who I got. It's the one I didn't get that I carry." If a story about the quietest person in the room turning out to be the strongest means something to you, Subscribe to the Veteran Vault, and let this one reach the people who need to be reminded what a nobody can be. Late that afternoon, when the office had long since gone back to its numbers and its clock, 3 of them stood at the base memorial wall in the low gold light. Beckett, Marin, and a very different Riker Malloy, quiet now, hollowed out, brought there by his chief and by his own dawning understanding that something had happened to him this morning that he did not yet have the size to hold. The wall was black granite, and it held names cut in careful rows, and Marin Rasmussen walked its length slowly with her fingers just off the stone until she found the one she was looking for. She stopped. She traced the letters once, the way she had traced them before, on other walls, in other years. Lance Corporal Wesley T. Kingman. Then she took Riker Malloy's hand. The young man flinched and let her, and she pressed his open palm flat against the carved name, and held it there, and spoke to him for the first time since the waiting room, without anger, in the level voice of someone laying something down that is heavier than he will understand, for years. "His name is Kingman," she said. "He was 19. He came from a town neither of us could pronounce, and he called me a name I never earned, in a ditch you will never see. And he died under my hands, asking me to tell his mother he wasn't scared." She let the silence sit. "You told me I would always be a nobody. This morning a rear admiral disagreed with you, but that's not the part I want you to keep. This is the part. He—" she pressed his hand harder against the stone. "Was a nobody too. A kid nobody in this building today would have looked at twice. And he was worth more than every clever thing you said with that phone in your face. Learn his name. Learn it before you ever again decide who counts." She took her hand away. Malloy left his there, against the cold stone, for a long time, and when he finally turned around, his eyes were not the same eyes. Beckett stood a little apart, letting it happen, his own hand at his side, a senior Marine who had spent 15 years rehearsing what he would say to this woman if he ever found her, and now discovered there was nothing to say that was not smaller than the thing itself. When Marin finally stepped back from the wall, he walked her a few paces along it and told her, low, about the 2 men she had saved and never gotten to know. Where they lived, what they did. The ordinary, miraculous shape of the lives she had bought them with 3 trips, across an open wadi. She listened to all of it. She did not cry. She had learned, somewhere in 15 years, how to let good news land on the same shelf where she kept the rest of it, gently, so nothing broke. Marin Rasmussen squared her folder under her arm and walked back toward the parking lot alone, the same overlooked woman in a plain blue jacket she had been that morning, except that now 3 flag-marked SUVs idled at the curb, doors open, ready to carry her anywhere she wanted to go. Rear Admiral Thorne stood beside the lead vehicle waiting to see her off. She thanked him, and she waved the SUVs away, and she walked past them to an ordinary sedan at the far end of the lot, and she got in, and she pulled out into the gray afternoon like anybody's aunt heading home. Nobody in that parking lot who didn't already know would ever have guessed. That was, in the end, the whole of it, that the strongest person any of them would meet that year had walked among them all morning, wearing nothing that gave her away, and would have gone on, being a nobody in that building for the rest of her natural life, if a Marine she once dragged out of a ditch had not come through the door at the exact right moment, and refused, out loud, to let her disappear again. A 2-star flag officer watched her go, and back at the black wall, a young man who had learned something stood with his hand still warm from the stone, saying a dead Marine's name under his breath until he had it by heart. Some warriors fade quietly into the years, but the valor never leaves them. Honor the ones who carry it in silence. Thank you for staying and watching. Subscribe to the Veteran Vault for more.